They put up a fence overnight. No warning, no permission, just cold steel across the only road connecting our land to the outside world. If that sounds insane, it gets worse. Our town's beloved war veteran was the one they targeted. And their mistake? Thinking he'd go quietly. This isn't just another HOA horror story. It's the story of how a 70-year-old man with a lifetime of grit and a rusted excavator stood up to a corrupt board and shook an entire neighborhood awake. Where are you watching this from? Ever dealt with a petty HOA? Drop your city in the comments. I bet you've got stories too. Stick around, because when that fence went up, something much bigger started coming down. The morning started like any other in our little dead-end suburban corner. Grandpa Earl was nursing his black coffee on the porch, squinting at the sunrise over the gravel road that connected our old property to the highway. This road had been here for decades, long before the fancy development sprouted up around us. Our modest house sat on 5 acres of what used to be farmland before the suburbs crept closer, with Karen's McMansion looming in the near distance like an architectural middle finger to anyone with reasonable taste. Earl built this place with his own hands after coming back from Vietnam, and I'd moved in with him 3 years ago to save money while building my freelance videography business. The arrangement worked well for both of us. He got company and help with the heavy lifting, and I got free rent and endless stories about the good old days before people needed permission to paint their own mailbox. I was loading equipment into my truck for a wedding shoot when I heard Earl's coffee mug shatter on the porch steps. Following his gaze, I spotted it, a 6-foot chain-link monstrosity stretching completely across our access road, adorned with a laminated sign that read, publicproperty.or.o. It had appeared overnight like some kind of suburban magic trick, and based on Earl's reddening face, the rabbit was about to be set on fire. Those city slickers with their clipboards, he muttered, a phrase I'd heard countless times whenever the HOA sent us violation notices about Earl's rusty pickup truck or our aesthetically displeasing tool shed. But this was different. This wasn't just a nastygram. This was a declaration of war. Earl's hands trembled slightly as he retrieved his property documents from a weathered filing cabinet. Papers that had been signed long before Karen had ever set her rhinestone-studded sandals in our neighborhood. Within the hour, Karen herself appeared at the fence line in a powder blue pantsuit, flanked by 2 HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Good morning, Mr. Simmons," she called out with practiced sweetness that could give you cavities. "I see you've noticed our new security measure. We've had some concerns about non-resident traffic using this road, and the board voted unanimously to secure it." Earl, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet until now, simply held up his yellowed property documents. "This here says I've got legal right-of-ways through this land. My wife and I bought this property in 1972, and this road's been here since before your fancy houses were even a blueprint." Karen's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed to slits. "Well, those documents may need reviewing. Our survey shows this is HOA property now, and until you address the $5,000 fine for multiple aesthetic violations, we won't be discussing access privileges." I was recording the entire interaction on my phone, partly out of instinct as a videographer and partly because I knew we'd need evidence. Earl's face fell slightly at the mention of $5,000. His fixed income couldn't take that kind of hit, and we both knew it. But instead of arguing further, he simply turned to me and said, "War it is, then." As Karen strutted away, I posted a quick clip online with the caption, "HOA blocks elderly veterans' only road access," which immediately started gathering local attention. My cousin Lila, a college freshman with a talent for internet chaos, helped it gain traction by tagging local news outlets. Back at the house, Earl was already on the phone with his old friend Tom, who owned the farm down the road. "Tommy, remember that favor you owe me from '82? I'm calling it in. Bring the cat, the big one." The next morning, I drove into town to meet Lila at the county records office. While Earl's generation might solve problems with excavators, mine preferred digital dirt digging. Lila had already pulled up Karen Pritchard's history across 3 counties, revealing a pattern that made my blood boil. "She's done this before, Jake. 3 times. Lila whispered, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. "Look at this subdivision in Westbrook. 5 years ago, she led an HOA crusade against an elderly couple who owned an original farmhouse. Within 8 months, they sold at a loss, the property was rezoned, and guess who was suddenly working as a consultant for the developer who built luxury condos there? The record showed Karen had received nearly $50,000 for her community liaison services after the old couple moved out. We found similar situations in 2 other neighborhoods, all following the same playbook. Target non-conforming properties, make life miserable for the owners through excessive fines and restrictions, then profit when they finally gave up. Back at the house, Earl was tinkering with his old truck, his way of working through problems. His calloused hands moved methodically through the engine components while I explained what we'd discovered. So, she's not just a power-hungry busybody. She's a crook with a system, he concluded, wiping grease from his fingers. Doesn't surprise me one bit. City folks think country people are simple, but we just value different things. Tom had joined us, bringing the news that Karen was organizing an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the dangerous elements in the neighborhood, meaning us. She's painting you as some kind of unhinged menace, Earl. Says that excavator stunt proves you're volatile and threatening property values. Earl chuckled darkly. Volatile? I'll show her volatile. Tom, can I keep that cat for a few more days? Tom grinned and tossed him the keys. It's all yours, brother. Consider it my contribution to the resistance. That night, I set up surveillance cameras around our property, anticipating Karen's next move. Earl had been unusually quiet during dinner, looking at old photos of Grandma Martha and their early days on the property. You know, Jake, your grandmother used to say that sometimes you have to be loud to be heard, but smart to be understood. Think I've been plenty loud. Time to get smart. His plan was simple but effective. When the HOA meeting was announced for Friday evening at the community center we would attend, armed with the records we'd found and a special surprise. Lila had discovered that Karen's precious HOA bylaws required proper notice for any property line disputes, and she had failed to document the fence installation according to their own rules. It was a technicality, but sometimes technicalities were all you needed to jam a bureaucratic machine. Friday evening arrived with rain threatening in the darkening sky. Earl, dressed in his only suit, the one he wore to funerals and weddings, with his Vietnam service pins prominently displayed on the lapel. Appearances matter to these people, he explained, polishing his shoes to a military shine. Time to remind them who they're dealing with. The community center parking lot was packed when we arrived, curious neighbors filing in to witness the drama firsthand. Karen stood at the podium in a designer outfit that probably cost more than our monthly expenses, her platinum blonde hair arranged in an architectural feat that defied both gravity and taste. As you all know, we've had an unfortunate incident involving property damage, she began, clicking through a slideshow of the damaged fence, artfully photographed to maximize the destruction. This kind of volatile behavior threatens our community standards and ultimately our property values. Earl sat patiently through her 20-minute presentation, which painted him as everything from a code violator to practically a domestic terrorist. When the floor opened for comments, he stood slowly, his joints creaking in protest. The room fell silent as he made his way to the microphone, a manila folder tucked under his arm. Name's Earl Simmons. Most of you know me. Been here since before this was a neighborhood. Fought for this country when I was younger than most of your children. He opened the folder deliberately. Seems to me there's been some confusion about property lines and who has the right to block access roads. According to your own bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph 3, any modification affecting property access requires a 60-day notice period and a property survey filed with the county. He slid the HOA's own documentation across the table. No such filing was made. That fence was illegal by your own rules. The following week passed in a blur of legal research and community outreach. While Earl and I prepared for the county supervisor hearing, Karen was busy rallying her troops. She organized an extravagant HOA gala at the community clubhouse, complete with catered food, free-flowing wine, and a glossy presentation about neighborhood enhancement initiatives. The centerpiece of her event was a scale model of a proposed community park, conveniently located exactly where our house currently stood. I managed to slip into the gala unnoticed, my camera hidden in a satchel, capturing footage of Karen working the room like a seasoned politician. Just imagine, she cooed to a group of admiring homeowners. A beautiful green space instead of that junkyard at the end of Oak Drive. Property values would increase by at least 15% overnight. She neglected to mention that her ex-husband's company would be developing luxury condos just beyond the park once our land was acquired. The day before the county hearing, a sheriff's deputy delivered court summons papers to our door. Karen was suing Earl for $50,000 in damages, claiming emotional distress and property devaluation resulting from the fence incident. The astronomical figure was clearly designed to force a settlement that would include selling the property. Earl's hand shook as he read the documents, his face ashen. "I don't have that kind of money, Jake. All I've got is this house and land." I tried to reassure him that the lawsuit was just another intimidation tactic, but doubt had crept into his eyes. That night, I heard him talking to my grandmother's photograph in his bedroom, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I can keep our promise, Martha. These people have lawyers and money and connections. Maybe I'm just too old for this fight." The morning of the hearing dawned gray and drizzling, matching our mood. Earl dressed in his best again, this time adding his faded VFW cap. "If I'm going down as who I am," he declared, though his usual confidence seemed hollow. The county building was an imposing brick structure downtown, its chambers filled with officials in suits and citizens waiting for their cases to be heard. Karen arrived with not only her attorney but also a man in an expensive suit, whom Lila quietly identified as Karen's ex-husband, Michael Pritchard, the developer. They sat across the aisle from us, Karen smirking confidently while scrolling through her phone. When our case was called, the county supervisor, a balding man named Richardson with tired eyes, reviewed the documents before him with obvious disinterest. Karen's attorney presented first, his voice smooth and practiced as he displayed maps showing the rezoning from the 90s. "As you can see, the Simmons property's easement was contingent upon proper filing by the 1996 deadline, which was missed. This means the access road is, in fact, now HOA property without any legal right-of-ways." Richardson nodded, barely looking up from the papers. "And the fence erected by the HOA was within their rights as the legal property owners." When Earl's turn came, he stood slowly, his legal representation limited to a public advocate who had been assigned to us just that morning and barely understood our case. Earl cleared his throat nervously, producing his original property documents. "Sir, my wife and I bought this land in 1972, long before there was an HOA. We've used that road for over 50 years without anyone questioning it." Richardson looked sympathetic but unmoved. "Mr. Simmons, continuous use doesn't override proper legal filing. The rezoning ordinance clearly required re-registration of all easements." Earl's shoulders slumped visibly as he continued. "My wife was dying of cancer during that filing period. I was her caretaker. We never received proper notification about the requirement." I watched Karen's slight smile at Earl's admission, and something inside me snapped. Standing abruptly, I approached the bench with my laptop. "Sir, I have evidence that this entire situation has been manufactured as part of a development scheme." Richardson frowned. "Young man, unless you're a licensed attorney." But I pressed on, opening emails that Lila had found through public records requests. These communications between Karen Pritchard and Platinum Horizons Development show they've been targeting our property for acquisition for over a year. The following day, Maggie arrived at our house looking nervous but determined, clutching a small flash drive like it contained state secrets. "I work in telecommunications," she explained, perching awkwardly on the edge of Earl's sofa. "Part of my job is monitoring service quality on our networks. I noticed unusual call patterns from Karen's line. Long conversations with the same numbers right before, hey, emergencies happened." She had documented dozens of calls between Karen and various officials, contractors, and her ex-husband in the weeks leading up to the fence installation. Most damning were recorded conversations, legal in our state with one-party consent, in which Karen explicitly discussed using HOA regulations to force Earl to sell. "The property is worthless without road access," Karen's voice rang clearly from my laptop speakers. "Once the easement issue is pushed to federal court, he won't be able to afford the fight. We'll get the land for pennies on the dollar." The recordings were a gold mine, but using them required careful consideration. Lila's law student friend advised us that while the recordings were legally obtained, leveraging them improperly could backfire. "You need to think strategically," she counseled during a video call. "Going public might feel satisfying, but a targeted approach through proper channels will be more effective." She suggested filing formal complaints with the state attorney general's office regarding HOA fraud and contacting the county ethics board about Karen's undisclosed conflict of interest. Earl, who had been quietly listening, suddenly straightened in his chair. "What about that county supervisor, Richardson? He seemed interested when Jake showed those emails. Would he care about these recordings too?" The law student nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. County supervisors have surprising authority over development projects and HOA oversight." While I prepared formal complaints with our new evidence, Earl faced a more immediate problem. The federal court summons Karen had engineered required a response within 30 days, and legal representation would cost thousands we didn't have. That evening, as Earl and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, the gravity of our situation hung heavy between us. "Maybe it's time I considered their offers," Earl said quietly, his voice catching. "Martha would understand. Things change. Can't fight progress forever." I was about to protest when a caravan of cars turned into our driveway, headlights illuminating the gathering dusk. Neighbors, at least a dozen of them, emerged with casserole dishes, 6-packs of beer, and determined expressions. Maggie led the group, transformed from the timid woman who had once fearfully delivered cookies into someone with purpose in her stride. "We took a vote," she announced without preamble. "The real neighbors, not Karen's bored puppets. We're establishing a legal defense fund for you, Earl. Karen's been bleeding us dry for years with her selective enforcement and mysterious fees. It's time we fought back. Together." Davis, the accountant who had questioned the financial records, stepped forward with a folder. "I've been analyzing the HOA books. There are at least $30,000 in homeowner fees that never made it to official accounts. I've documented everything for the authorities." Other neighbors shared similar stories, promised community improvements that never materialized, suspicious contracts awarded to companies connected to Karen or Michael, property values manipulated through selective enforcement of rules. What had begun as Earl's isolated battle had catalyzed a neighborhood awakening. Our newfound coalition wasted no time. The next morning, Davis and the retired paralegal accompanied Earl to the county supervisor's office with copies of Maggie's recordings and the financial discrepancies. Richardson, whose earlier judicial disinterest had given way to genuine concern about corruption, listened intently. "This goes beyond a simple property dispute," he acknowledged, reviewing the evidence. "I'm going to refer this to the county prosecutor's office and place a hold on any development permits connected to Platinum Horizons until this matter is resolved." It was a significant victory, but Earl remained pragmatic. Holding patterns and investigations take time. What about my immediate problem with that federal filing? Richardson smiled for the first time. "As it happens, I have some discretion there. I'm issuing an emergency easement confirmation based on historical use. It won't solve everything permanently, but it will buy you time while the larger investigation proceeds." Word of our meeting with Richardson spread quickly, and by afternoon local news vans were parked at the end of our disputed road. Karen, who had been uncharacteristically silent for days, finally emerged for an impromptu press conference in front of her house. Her usual polished appearance had slipped, her makeup slightly smudged, her designer outfit replaced by casual wear. "These accusations are completely unfounded," she declared, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "The HOA has always operated with full transparency and in the best interests of the community. This is nothing but a smear campaign by residents who refuse to maintain community standards." But even as she spoke, county vehicles arrived at the fence site, workers beginning the court-ordered removal process. The visual of Karen defending herself while the physical symbol of her overreach was dismantled behind her was poetically fitting. That evening, as Earl drove his truck through the reopened road for the first time in weeks, honking triumphantly, neighbors came out to cheer. What should have been a simple trip to the grocery store became a victory parade, with Earl waving like a hometown hero returning from battle. Back at the house, however, his celebration was tempered with caution. "This feels good, but it ain't over," he warned, as we sorted through the mounting evidence against Karen. "She's desperate now, and desperate folks do desperate things." His words proved prophetic when Tom called near midnight, his voice tight with anger. "Someone slashed my tires, all 4 of them, and there's a note, says mind your own business or else. Professional job too, small cuts that leak slowly rather than blow out." Similar reports came from other coalition members. Davis found his mailbox smashed. Maggie's front window was broken by a rock with the same message. The intimidation tactics backfired spectacularly. Instead of frightening people into silence, they galvanized the community further. Neighbors organized a rotating security watch. Those with security cameras shared footage. Earl's property became an informal headquarters for what was now being called the Homeowners Truth Coalition. Lila set up a secure online hub where evidence could be uploaded and shared with authorities, carefully documenting each intimidation attempt. "They're getting sloppy," she observed, reviewing security footage that showed a car similar to Michael Pritchard's in the vicinity during several incidents. Desperate people make mistakes. The county prosecutor's office officially opened an investigation into both the HOA's financial practices and the harassment campaign, requesting all our evidence and interviewing key neighbors. Karen's final desperate move came with breathtaking audacity. Using her remaining influence with 2 loyal board members, she called an emergency HOA meeting with a single agenda item, invoking the nuclear option in the HOA bylaws, forced sale for community necessity. This rarely used provision, buried in legal jargon that few homeowners had likely read, allowed the HOA to force the sale of property deemed essential for community development if approved by a supermajority vote. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening, deliberately timed when several of our allies had existing commitments. "She's trying to stack the deck," Earl growled when the notice arrived. "One last push to get my land before all her schemes fall apart." The timing was particularly troubling because the county prosecutor had scheduled key interviews for the following Monday. If Karen succeeded in forcing a sale vote, she might sidestep the legal consequences bearing down on her. With only 2 days to prepare, our coalition worked frantically to ensure every supportive homeowner could attend the critical vote. Those who couldn't attend in person prepared proxy votes, carefully documented to prevent any procedural chicanery. Earl spent hours on the phone, his usual reticence giving way to passionate appeals about community and justice. "This isn't just about my land anymore," he told each neighbor. "It's about whether we let bullies and crooks determine how we live." By Thursday night, we had commitments from enough homeowners to defeat the supermajority requirement, assuming everyone showed up and no procedural surprises awaited. As Earl and I reviewed our vote count one final time, he clasped my shoulder with a weathered hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Jake, I want you to know I'm proud of how you've handled this. Your grandmother would say you've got her fighting spirit." Friday dawned clear and cool, a beautiful spring day at odds with the tension gripping our community. Earl dressed carefully in his best suit again, this time adding the pocket watch that had belonged to his father. "For luck," he explained simply. The community center parking lot was overflowing when we arrived, with news crews setting up outside. Our dispute had now become a local sensation, framed as a David versus Goliath battle between a Vietnam veteran and a corrupt HOA president. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with tension as Karen took her place at the podium, flanked by her 2 remaining loyal board members and a new attorney none of us recognized. Her composure had returned, along with a confidence that made my stomach tighten with apprehension. She smiled directly at Earl as she called the meeting to order, a predatory grin that suggested she still had cards to play. "Before we proceed to the vote on community acquisition of the Simmons property," Karen began, her voice steady and practiced, "I'd like to address the unfortunate misinformation campaign that has been circulating." She clicked to a slideshow featuring manipulated images of Earl's property, edited to look more dilapidated and hazardous than it actually was. "This isn't about personal vendettas, as some have claimed. This is about community safety and property value." Her new attorney stepped forward, introducing himself as a specialist in HOA law. "I've reviewed all materials related to this case, and I can assure the community that the board's actions have been legally sound and properly motivated. The recent county easement is temporary and doesn't address the underlying safety concerns this property presents." Earl sat stoically as Karen methodically presented her case, painting him as an obstinate holdout preventing community progress. The careful framing of her argument, focusing on property values and safety rather than her development plans, was clearly designed to appeal to homeowners' financial self-interest. I could see uncertainty flickering across some faces as Karen showed charts projecting increased home values following the proposed community green space development. When she produced a video supposedly showing Earl threatening her during a previous encounter, my heart sank. The footage was clearly edited, splicing together different conversations to make Earl appear aggressive. "This is the individual some of you are defending," Karen concluded, her voice dropping dramatically. "Ask yourselves if this is really about an elderly veteran or about someone who refuses to acknowledge that times change." When Earl's turn came to speak, he approached the podium slowly, the weight of decades evident in his careful steps. The room fell silent, every eye on this man who had become the center of a community storm. "I'm not much for public speaking," he began, his voice low but steady. "Spent most of my life working with my hands rather than my mouth, but I know a few things for certain." He looked around the room, making eye contact with neighbors he'd known for years and others he was just getting to know through this ordeal. "I know that community isn't about property values or fancy clubhouses. It's about people looking out for each other. My wife Martha and I moved here 53 years ago because we wanted a place to put down roots, to be part of something that would last." Earl continued, his voice gaining strength. "That video Ms. Pritchard showed you? That's from 3 different conversations spliced together. I may be old, but I know when I'm being misrepresented." Davis, our accountant ally, stepped forward with his laptop. We anticipated this tactic and prepared a response. He played the original, unedited footage that Maggie had been recording all along, clearly showing how Karen had manufactured the threatening narrative. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd as the manipulation became evident. Earl nodded his thanks to Davis before turning back to the assembly. I'm not against progress or community improvements, but I am against dishonesty and backroom deals that benefit a few at the expense of many. Karen's face flushed with anger as her carefully constructed narrative unraveled. This is ridiculous. We're here to vote on a community necessity provision, not to litigate old grievances. But Earl wasn't finished. He gestured to Tom, who wheeled in a large presentation board covered with a cloth. Before we vote, I think everyone should know exactly what's planned for my property if it's acquired. Tom removed the cloth with a flourish, revealing not the community park Karen had been promoting, but the actual architectural plans for luxury condominiums, filed by Platinum Horizons with the county planning department just weeks earlier. These plans were submitted quietly while we were all arguing about fences and easements, Earl explained. Not a park, not community space. Private condos starting at $300,000, with Ms. Pritchard's ex-husband's company as the developer of record. The room erupted in chaos as homeowners realized the extent of the deception. Karen frantically gobbled for order, but her authority had evaporated. Her attorney whispered urgently in her ear as she visibly calculated her options. When she finally spoke again, her voice had taken on a desperate edge. These plans are preliminary concepts only. The board would never approve development without community input, but Davis was already distributing copies of emails between Karen and Platinum Horizons, discussing guaranteed board approval and managing community expectations. The momentum had shifted decisively, but Karen had one final card to play. Regardless of future plans, we still need to vote on the necessity provision. According to our bylaws, this vote proceeds as scheduled. The voting process itself became contentious, with Karen's supporters attempting to disqualify several proxy votes on technicalities. Earl watched with remarkable calm as procedural arguments flew back and forth, his weathered hands folded patiently in his lap. "She's stalling," he murmured to me, hoping enough folks will get tired and leave before the actual vote. He was right. The bureaucratic wrangling was deliberately tedious, and I could see some neighbors checking watches and shifting restlessly as the evening dragged on. But then something unexpected happened. Lila, who had been quietly working on her laptop in the corner, suddenly projected a screen onto the wall. While we've been arguing procedure, I thought it might be interesting to look at where the HOA's Special Project Fund has actually been going. Her presentation displayed bank transfers from the HOA account to a shell company that, through several layers of corporate veiling, connected directly back to Karen and Michael Pritchard. Over $200,000 in homeowner fees have been diverted through this company in the past 3 years, Leela explained calmly. That's money that was supposed to be used for community improvements, not private business interests. The room fell silent as the financial evidence appeared in clean, undeniable rows and columns. Karen's attorney frantically tried to shut down the presentation, claiming it was irrelevant to the vote at hand, but the damage was done. The carefully orchestrated vote collapsed as 2 board members, seeing the writing on the wall, publicly resigned their positions rather than be associated with the growing scandal. Karen, her face now ashen, abruptly gathered her papers and headed for the exit. "This meeting is adjourned due to disruptive behavior," she announced, her voice brittle. "We'll reconvene when civility can be maintained." As she pushed through the crowd toward the door, Earl's voice rang out, stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Running away, Karen? Just like you did in Westbrook and Pine Creek when people started asking questions?" She froze momentarily, then continued without looking back, her high heels clicking rapidly across the floor. The emergency vote never happened, and as neighbors clustered around Earl with congratulations and questions, I noticed Maggie slipping out a side door, following discreetly in Karen's wake, her phone held low but clearly recording. Later that night, our house became celebration central, with neighbors dropping by with food, drinks, and stories of their own run-ins with Karen's regime. Earl, typically early to bed, stayed up past midnight, reveling in the community spirit that had emerged from adversity. Martha would have loved this, he confided, watching Tom regale a group with an exaggerated reenactment of Karen's exit. She always said, trouble either tears people apart or binds them together. Guess we know which way this went. But our celebration was premature. Around 2 a.m, emergency vehicles' lights flashed through our windows and the smell of smoke drifted across the property. Earl's shed, containing decades of tools, mementos, and the documentation of his life with Martha, was engulfed in flames, the fire spreading dangerously close to the house itself. As firefighters battled the blaze, the sheriff pulled me aside. "This wasn't accidental," he said grimly. "Accelerant was used, and the lock was broken. We're treating it as arson." Earl stood silently, watching his past burn, his face illuminated by the cruel orange glow. I expected devastation, but when he turned to me, his eyes held only steely resolve. "She thinks this will break me," he said quietly. "She doesn't understand what real loss is." By dawn, the shed was a smoldering ruin, but neighbors were already arriving with tools, lumber, and offers to help rebuild. Davis approached with news that made the destruction almost worthwhile. "The sheriff found something while securing the perimeter," he reported excitedly. "Security camera footage from my house across the street. It's grainy, but it shows someone who looks an awful lot like Michael Pritchard near your property right before the fire started." The arson attack transformed our neighborhood dispute into a criminal investigation. While Earl and neighbors salvaged what they could from the shed ruins, I met with the sheriff to review evidence. The security footage, enhanced by technical experts, couldn't positively identify Michael, but it clearly showed someone of his build and gait. More damning was the discovery of a gas can in a dumpster 2 blocks away, bearing fingerprints that would be compared to county records. By afternoon, news vans were back, now reporting on criminal escalation in HOA dispute. Earl, his face smudged with soot but his spirit unbroken, gave a brief statement that perfectly captured the moment. "You can burn my things, but you can't burn my resolve or this community's determination to stand against corruption." The weekend brought a flurry of activity as neighbors helped clear debris from the shed fire and begin reconstruction. Earl supervised from his porch rocking chair, offering advice and stories to the volunteers. The community spirit was palpable. Even homeowners who had previously kept their distance were stopping by with food or lending a hand. I was filming the rebuilding effort when a sleek black sedan pulled into our driveway, and a distinguished older man in an expensive suit emerged. "I'm looking for Earl Simmons," he announced formally. Earl stood, approaching cautiously. "That's me, and you are?" The man extended a business card. "Walter Bennett, federal prosecutor. I need to speak with you privately about Karen Pritchard and Platinum Horizons development." Earl invited him inside, his expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. Bennett's visit revealed shocking news. "Your local situation has intersected with a broader investigation we've been conducting for nearly 2 years. Platinum Horizons has been using the same playbook in communities across 3 states, identifying properties that impede development, installing cooperative individuals in HOA leadership positions, and systematically forcing targeted homeowners out through harassment and fraudulent enforcement. The pattern matched our experience exactly, but the scale was alarming. Dozens of elderly homeowners had been pressured into selling at losses, with properties later flipped for massive profits. The Pritchards are smaller players in a larger organization. We've been building a RICO case against the development company's leadership, and your evidence could be the tipping point." The promising news was federal involvement, bringing resources beyond what we could muster. The concerning part was Bennett's warning. Now that criminal charges are pending, the people behind this operation are in damage control mode. Their legal exposure is significant. We're talking potential prison time. In our experience, this is when they're most dangerous. He recommended increased security measures and offered police protection, which Earl reluctantly accepted. "Never thought I'd have cops guarding my property in my golden years," he muttered after Bennett left. Despite his light tone, I could see the toll the situation was taking on him. New lines around his eyes, a weariness in his movements. That evening, a certified letter arrived containing Karen's most audacious move yet. Her attorneys had filed an emergency federal injunction claiming Earl's property violated obscure environmental regulations related to watershed protection. "This is desperate nonsense," Davis said after reviewing the filing. "It's based on a misapplication of EPA guidelines that don't even apply to residential properties of this size. But fighting it will require specialized environmental attorneys and expert witnesses." The strategy was clear. Even with criminal charges looming, Karen was trying to drain our resources through legal attrition. The injunction hearing was scheduled for just 3 days later, leaving minimal time to prepare. Lila activated our neighborhood network, and within hours we had contacted environmental law specialists and former EPA officials willing to testify about the inapplicability of the regulations. Tom's daughter, an environmental engineer, created a detailed analysis of our property's watershed impact, demonstrating compliance with all standards. Despite the rapid response, Earl seemed unusually subdued. Late that night, I found him at the kitchen table, staring at Martha's photograph. "I'm tired, Jake," he admitted quietly. "Didn't think I'd be fighting battles like this at 70. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it." His moment of vulnerability hit me hard. This was the man who had taught me to never back down, now questioning the fight. I sat beside him, choosing my words carefully. "Nobody would blame you if you wanted peace, Grandpa." Earl nodded slowly, tracing Martha's face in the photograph. "She and I bought this place with nothing but hope and sweat. When she got sick, she made me promise I'd keep it in the family, that all our work would mean something lasting." He looked up, his eyes suddenly clear and determined again. Pritchards of the world have been trying to push little guys around forever. Someone's got to stand up to them, especially when it's hard. By morning, his resolve had returned. As volunteers continued the shed rebuilding, Earl was back on his porch, directing operations with renewed energy. The day before the federal hearing brought unexpected allies. Bennett returned with news that 3 other homeowners had come forward with nearly identical stories about Platinum Horizons and HOA manipulation. More surprisingly, Michael Pritchard's administrative assistant had approached authorities with internal documents showing the company had specifically targeted Earl's property months earlier, identifying it as strategic for acquisition due to its position at the development boundary. She claims she didn't know about the illegal tactics, Bennett explained, but documented everything after becoming suspicious about Karen's involvement and the unusual focus on a single property. The assistant had preserved emails, meeting notes, and financial records, creating a comprehensive paper trail of the conspiracy. With our case strengthening by the hour, Karen made her final desperate move. As dusk fell, her luxury SUV pulled into our driveway, this time with no attorney or ex-husband in tow. She sat inside for several minutes before finally emerging, her designer outfit replaced by casual clothes, her typically perfect hair pulled back simply. The transformation was striking. Gone was the imperious HOA queen, replaced by someone who looked almost ordinary. Earl watched from the porch as she approached. "Evening, Karen," he called evenly. "Bit surprised to see you here." She hesitated at the foot of the steps. "Can we talk? Just us? No lawyers, no neighbors, no cameras?" Earl considered before nodding. "Jake stays. Otherwise, I'm listening." What followed was one of the most surreal conversations I've ever witnessed. Karen, the woman who had built her image on unshakable confidence, began to unravel before our eyes. "You don't understand what's at stake for me," she said, her voice stripped of its usual polish. "This was supposed to be simple, a standard acquisition like all the others. Buy out the holdout, develop the land, everyone profits. But you wouldn't budge, and now everything's falling apart." She paced the porch, increasingly agitated. "They're cutting me loose. Michael, the developers, everyone, making me the scapegoat for the entire operation. I'm facing criminal charges while they're cutting deals with prosecutors." For the first time, I saw Karen not as a villain, but as someone caught in a machine larger than herself, though one she had willingly joined. "I didn't start the fire," she insisted, though we hadn't accused her directly. "That was Michael's idea. I told him it was too far, but he said we needed to send a message." She looked at the half-rebuilt shed, then back to Earl. "I had a life before all this, a real estate career, plans, dreams. Then the housing crash happened and I lost everything. Platinum Horizons offered a way back. Find suitable properties, help acquire them, share in the profits. It seemed legitimate at first." Her voice hardened. "Then it became about winning, about not letting stubborn people like you stand in the way of progress. And now it's all coming apart." After several minutes, Karen finally reached her point. "I have a proposition. The federal injunction, I can make it go away. I have recordings of Michael discussing the fraudulent environmental claims with the attorneys. In exchange, I want your statement to prosecutors acknowledging that I was just following company directives, that I was pressured into the more extreme actions." Earl's eyebrows raised slightly. "You're asking me to help you avoid consequences after everything you've done to me in this community?" Karen's expression turned pleading. "I'm asking for a chance to not lose everything. The prosecutors want the bigger fish. Help me give them what they want, and this can all be over for you tomorrow." Earl was quiet for a long moment, rocking gently in his chair. "You know, Karen," he finally said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "my Martha used to say that character is what happens in the valley, not on the mountaintop. When you're down and facing the consequences of your choices, that's when you find out who you really are." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not interested in vengeance, never was. I just wanted to keep my home and be left in peace. But what you're asking for isn't justice. It's another manipulation, another shortcut." Karen's face fell as Earl continued. "I'll tell the prosecutors the truth, all of it, including what you've said here tonight. Sometimes the only way forward is straight through the mess you've made." The federal injunction hearing the next morning was anticlimactic. Karen's attorneys appeared without their client, requesting a continuance that was denied. When our environmental experts presented their analysis, the judge dismissed the case outright, citing frivolous application of irrelevant regulations. Bennett waited for us outside the courthouse. "Karen Pritchard turned herself in this morning. She's offering testimony against Platinum Horizons executives in exchange for consideration in her own case." What neither of us expected was Bennett's next revelation. The most interesting part? She brought Maggie with her as a witness. Apparently they've been in contact for months. Maggie was feeding Karen just enough information to keep her talking while documenting everything. Back at home, as neighbors gathered to celebrate, Maggie finally shared her full story. "After they threatened my home during my husband's illness, I started watching Karen. When Earl became her new target, I saw an opportunity to finally gather enough evidence to stop her permanently." Her eyes, usually timid behind her glasses, held steady conviction. "Sometimes the people they underestimate are the most dangerous. Karen never saw me as a threat, just a meek widow she could bully. That was her mistake." Earl raised his glass to her in a toast, to the quiet ones who see everything and wait for the right moment. 6 months after our victory, our neighborhood transformed into a genuine community, with Earl serving as an honorary advisor to the reformed HOA. Our story gained national attention in discussions about homeowners' rights. Karen received 18 months of house arrest for cooperating against Platinum Horizons, while Michael faced 7 years for fraud and arson. Earl's property received permanent protection through new easements and historical designation. At the community Christmas party, Karen made a brief, uncomfortable appearance. Earl's simple acknowledgement, "Merry Christmas, Karen, punch is pretty good this year," marked the beginning of an uncertain healing process. By spring, Earl transformed part of his property into a community garden and teaching space where neighbors could learn practical skills. Karen eventually joined the initiative, fulfilling court-ordered community service by teaching financial literacy workshops. During the garden's first harvest celebration, Earl took the excavator for a final victory lap around the property while neighbors cheered. Later, he reluctantly accepted nomination as HOA president, with the promise to ensure homes are for people, not for profit. When plans for new development adjacent to our neighborhood emerged, Earl agreed to participate in the planning process. Progress happens. Question is whether it happens with us or despite us. Figure I'd rather be at the table than on the menu. Our battle revealed what makes a place worth fighting for. When it holds your history, connects you to others, and represents something larger than yourself. And if another fence ever appears where it doesn't belong, Earl's excavator remains ready for one more spin.